meaningful games into late November for the New York Giants. Yes, this is not a mistake. Yes, they're 3-7, but they finally beat the Eagles, which in and itself is an accomplishment. Throw all the records out the window. They had an 8-game losing streak against Philly. I have been saying how this was just a team that they could never beat. Didn't matter how big the lead was, the injuries, whatever the circumstances were, they just couldn't get it done. And on Sunday, they won it totally clean. It was a really solid game from the offense to the defense to special teams to coaching. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty damn near close. And now that puts you in a position where after this bye, there is going to be games of importance. And I think it's very important for a young team to experience this. They have not, for the last 3-4 years, obviously 2016 being the last season where they made the playoffs, the 3 seasons after that, they've been out of it very early. And it seemed like it was going to head in that direction this year, where I was basically already in a draft position mode, while also understanding that the uniqueness of how bad the NFC East was going to lead to a situation like this, where if they did take care of things within the division, in what was a weird schedule where they played a lot of games within the NFC East in a very short amount of time. If you think about it, they had the Dallas game, and then they had the Washington game, and then Philly, Tampa Bay sandwiched in between Washington and Philly again. So they were able to do just enough. And this was the first game this season where they won when I was cheering for them. The first time. But it came at the right time, and they may end up falling just short. That Eagle tie could end up making the difference, but the Philadelphia Eagles do not look good whatsoever. So I think if you're a Giant fan, there's reason for optimism. And not so much on a playoff chance perspective, but more so, this is a really good coaching staff. And I'm not just saying that, just for shits and giggles. This is a great situation for this team to be in. They got this one right. Joe Judge pays so much attention to detail. He doesn't change his mindset, whether they win or lose. Sure, can some of his post-game press conferences be, he's saying kind of the same stuff, general things? Yeah. But you could just tell that he has a good idea of what he wants, and the players are buying in. They're well-disciplined. They're always playing with 100% effort all the time. There is something to be said for that. And as someone who's watched the last few years with different regimes, and it was just ugly football, generally speaking. So it's a noticeable difference, without question. And Daniel Jones, 2 games in a row now with no turnovers. That can't be understated. He is doing what he needs to do, and he can control his narrative. That's the beauty of it, where let's say they did end up finishing with a really bad record, which it's still possible, certainly still possible. But let's say, they ended up 2-14 or something of that nature. He would have been in a position where maybe the Giants take one of the top quarterbacks. I think that would have maybe been a little bit premature, but if they were to have that bad of a record, it probably would have meant that Jones may not have been so successful. But by him winning games, he basically says, you know what? I'm not even going to allow you to be in a position where you can draft a top quarterback. And if he can play mistake-free football, look, he's going to obviously turn the ball over. Even the best QBs in the league. We just saw this weekend Russell Wilson, and so what's going to happen. But if he can play this smart brand of football while also showing off what he can do on the ground, it's going to be tough to defend, because the read option, it's causing teams to not know what to do when they're running the ball consistently well. And that's thanks to the offensive line who's coming together. And what I think is impressive with Joe Judge is that usually you hear continuity, right? Like 5 offensive linemen who have been together for a while. Ideally, that would, bring about a very cohesive unit. But what they're doing is they're mixing and matching. So you have your starting 5, but then you're seeing, Matt Peart come in to replace Andrew Thomas or Cam Fleming. You're seeing right now Will Hernandez maybe come in for Shane Lemieux, or Kevin Zeitler had a concussion, so that kind of took care of itself. And the running game is really effective. Wayne Gallman, he loves contact. That's the most impressive thing about him, and that's how he was in Clemson. He's not flashy. You can tell the coaching staff doesn't really trust him in certain situations. Like in passing downs, you will not see him on the field at all. That's going to be all Dion Lewis. But Gallman, he's adding, a different dimension to this offense, and it's keeping defenses honest. So if Daniel Jones keeps the ball, he has space, and he is fast. I'm not even just talking about QB fast. He's just, in general, has a lot of speed. I mean, obviously, I had assumed that the quarterback after Eli would be more mobile. I mean, which isn't any crazy assumption, right? But he's doing more than just that. And I think that is going to be very, very important. And I think Jason Garrett, I didn't mind the Jason Garrett hire as an offensive coordinator. Was he cut out to be a head coach? Probably not. Although with what's going on with Mike McCarthy in Dallas, it's kind of seeming like maybe Jason Garrett wasn't as bad as we thought. But with that being said, this isn't such a vanilla offense at this stage in the game. They're doing what they need to do. And give credit to Patrick Graham on defense as well, because while they made some very key signings, James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, who have both worked out tremendously, this isn't the most talented unit. I think most observers would agree with that. And so I think he's doing a lot with a little. Xavier McKinney should be back off the bye. I'm curious to see what his role will be. They're kind of deep at safety, but maybe could you move Julian Love to corner? I'm not really seeing that, but obviously opposite Bradbury, they've been using Isaac Yiadom a lot, and it seemed like he kind of held his own yesterday. I didn't notice any glaring mistakes, but they're getting a little bit healthier on defense. And what you like about this team is they use a lot of different players in different situations, and that's from the school of Bill Belichick for sure. It's everyone is doing what they need to do to help the team be successful. Even on that Daniel Jones rushing touchdown, great blocks by Austin Mack and Caden Smith and CJ Board, guys that you've probably never heard of. Undrafted guys at that. And so the defense, it was a bit of bend but don't break, but honestly, it was even better than that. They had a couple of really rough drives early in the second half where the Eagles were running the ball really well. Mainly Miles Sanders. Of course, the giant killer Boston Scott with a 50-yard touchdown run down the sideline. So that was a bit of an issue. But once they really had to make the stops, which we never see them do, that's been my biggest problem with them. When they need to come up with the big stop, they don't do it. They definitely did it in this game. There's no complaints at all. Not coming from me. And what was another interesting situation was Darius Slayton had a drop that kind of reminded you a little bit of the Evan Ingram drop. Not quite as, it was way more time left, but you could draw the comparison. And what happens later on? He makes a very big 40-yard catch to essentially clinch the game, which was then further clinched on a Graham Gano field goal. He's been money, and now he's getting money. 3-year contract, which I don't love personally, giving too much money in, term to a kicker. That's just kind of my preference, but the guy has been great. No denying that. He is such an upgrade over Rosas. So while I think kickers can kind of be good one year, not so good the next, there's risk, but he certainly earned it. You feel really confident when he is, lining up for a field goal or an extra point. So on to the bye, and the Giants will be doing a lot of scoreboard watching. In the NFC East, Dallas had a bye this week, and so Washington played Detroit. And the one thing I'll say about Washington is they are very gritty. So they don't have all that much talent. They have Alex Smith, the quarterback. They were down by 3 touchdowns to Detroit, and they were able to tie it up. And I know Detroit is one of those teams we talk about that is really, really, really choky. Like in line with the Chargers, and the Falcons, and the Giants to a degree. Lions are one of those teams that blow leads. And Washington tied it up. But an underrated play that happened in the game was before Washington tied it up with a field goal by Dustin Hopkins, the Washington receiver runs out of bounds. If he doesn't do that, Detroit would either burn a timeout or they might have just let the clock roll down and, it would have been like a game time field, as the clock expired. So it gave Detroit just enough time to make some things happen, and Chase Young took a very critical personal foul penalty. A bit of a late hit to Matthew Stafford, and Matt Prater banged a 59-yard field goal that seemed like it would have been good from 70+. It's amazing the legs some of these kickers have. So Washington with a tough loss when you consider the state of the division. Again, under normal circumstances, Washington losing, some fans may say, all right, great. We need a quarterback. Let's lose. And there may have been some fans in that camp. But nonetheless, this was a pretty big loss for Washington. They now play the Bengals next week, who then play the Giants the week after. So I'll definitely have my eyes on that game. Dallas coming out of the bye is going to play the Vikings, who are now playing really solid football. They got off to a 1-5 start. Now they're 4-5 with 3 straight divisional wins. And Philly is playing at Cleveland, who is 6-3. And with them, they have a really good running attack with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So Giants might get the scoreboard help they need. And I think the Philly game in particular, if Philly loses, it's going to be fun, that Giants-Bengals game. It just is. Throw the records out the window. You got a race on your hands. And if the Giants were to lose to the Bengals, a lot of that good feel really gets sucked away, I have to admit. That's a game that it won't be easy, and in fact, I think the spread will probably be somewhat close to pick'em, if I had to guess right now. But considering the remaining games you have after that, this is definitely one of the more winnable ones. So if you want to keep that good momentum going, you got to win that game. Shifting over to another Eastern division, the AFC East, saw some pretty interesting games. Of course, the first one being the Bills versus the Cardinals. This was a game between Kyler Murray and Josh Allen. It was mistake-filled. You saw some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But how could you not just be in awe of the Hail Mary from Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins? And what the hell were the Texans thinking about with the David Johnson for DeAndre Hopkins trade? I know there were some more pieces to that, but that was the main parts of it. But wow. A running back for a receiver in the NFL, it just doesn't make sense. As we've seen with the Giants, Saquon Barkley is out, and yet with the improved offensive line play, Barkley, as I predicted then, that injury, to me, wasn't so critical to what you'd see in the win-loss department. So it really makes you wonder what Houston was thinking, and Bill O'Brien's lost his job since. So clearly that didn't work out. But as far as Arizona, they have been in some really wild games. I think back to that Seattle game a few weeks ago as well, where they were able to pull it out at the end. Clearly this is a team on the rise. And I think Kyler Murray, he's definitely a quarterback that can be stopped with the right game plan, the right game script. So, but very exciting to watch. He can run the ball effectively. He's got weapons. So this is going to be a team to watch down the stretch. And I can't wait, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but the NFC West game Thursday night between Arizona and Seattle. That's going to be a fun one. A quick rematch. Very quick turnaround, this time in Seattle. But staying in the AFC East, Buffalo, it was, a really good drive where Stephon Diggs, who was another great trade acquisition, he's been so much better than I thought he'd be. Him and Josh Allen just have such great chemistry. Even better, way better than last year between Josh Allen and John Brown. Now it's Stephon Diggs. And that's a tough loss. And I can't even really blame... I'm sure if you're a Bill fan, you're sick. But to me, Hopkins just went up and got it. It wasn't a situation where I saw where they were trying to intercept the ball. It looked like they were trying to bat it down. It seemed like, technically speaking, they were doing the right thing. And it just didn't work out. So that's a tough loss for the Bills because of the fact that the Dolphins won again. And that defense, and I think Brian Flores, I've said it a lot, it's a similar situation to what I hope will be for Joe Judge. And this Belichick coaching tree might be improving. It wasn't good for a while, but now we see a couple of guys that really learned a lot from him. And they do it the right way. And Tua, he's doing what he has to do. I haven't been overly impressed by him, but he's been a game manager because they've had great defense and special teams. And so he doesn't need to do a whole lot. And the Chargers, while their record isn't great, it's a very formidable offense with Justin Herbert and all the guys they have there with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Hunter Henry, so on and so forth. And Miami did a really good job. That was, they were in control of that game the whole way. So, whereas I was thinking maybe you only get one team from the AFC East in the playoffs, even with the extra. So now there's 7 teams that make it. Now I'm starting to think that may not be the case. You may get 2 teams. For sure. I could, at this point, the Bills and Dolphins making it, well within reason. And I think that last game of the season between Miami and Buffalo, in Buffalo, could definitely be for all the marbles. But let's not fully count out New England. When you thought they were left for dead, they were 2-5. They were on their way to possibly losing to the Jets. I mean, they were really close to losing that game. Should have, in fact. Come back and win. And then beat Baltimore, where the weather was very, very bad, especially late. And you can never count on a Belichick team. I don't think they'll be able to get it done. But they're 4-5. They got Houston next on the schedule. It's a winnable game. So they, already beat Miami. They barely lost that game to Buffalo where Cam Newton fumbled at the end. That's a game they're going to look back on and say, if we had gotten that, the whole landscape could have looked completely different. So to me, it's always a little bit more fun when New England is in the race. I know Brady's gone, but I think it adds a little bit of intrigue, the fact that they're still alive. And the Jets have a bye. So, Jets fans, you didn't lose this week. So, I guess that's a plus. And it sounded like Sam Darnold, well, actually, we know for sure Sam Darnold is out. And that's not a good sign for his health. The fact that they already ruled him out coming out of the bye, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for Sam Darnold. So, we touched on the New England-Baltimore game. I want to talk about the AFC North. And with Baltimore, I've never seen a situation where leading or being behind makes such a difference. When Baltimore is winning, they are tough. With that running attack, they're tough to beat. But when they're losing, and I know the weather didn't help, they got a tough time. They have a really, really tough time coming back. And this AFC North, it might just be over. Pittsburgh with a dominant win against Cincinnati. This division, it could be over. Just like that. Now, they play on Thanksgiving in Pittsburgh. So if Baltimore wins, that obviously changes the story. But even if they do, I don't know. I've not been that impressed with what Baltimore has. The skill position players, they got nothing going on there. Hollywood Brown, the way they use him, he's kind of an all-or-nothing type piece. And Mark Andrews, he's going to have to play more now that Nick Boyle is out for the season. So his snaps are Mark Andrews' snaps are going to increase. But They had that three-headed monster of Ingram, Edwards, and Dobbins. I'm just not impressed by what I'm seeing with Baltimore and Lamar Jackson specifically. So, do I think that they'll make the playoffs? Yeah, I think they'll find their way in there, but it's not, and if they do get in there, they're certainly a threat. It's a good defense, but we may have seen the best of them last season. They may have overachieved a bit, and now teams are figuring them out because their offense is a bit gimmicky in a sense. And I think teams are going for their throat right away, knowing, hey guys, if we take this lead and Lamar's gonna have to throw the ball, we're in good shape. And I think that's fair. Staying in the AFC North, and then from there we'll go to the South. Browns versus the Texans, which had, again, horrible wind, just like it did for the last Cleveland game against the Raiders. This one against the Texans had the same thing, and the Browns were able to win this time. And again, like I had mentioned previously, that rushing attack is very, very good. So they lose Odell, but as long as they have Chubb and Hunt, that's an effective formula. And you have a lot of these teams in the AFC who are 6-3, who haven't really been playoff contenders in quite some time. Cleveland, Miami, the Raiders. And it's going to be interesting to see who sticks around and who falters. Because there will be some of these teams, I'm not sure who, that are going to just drop out of it. That the schedule is going to tougher. What you see is kind of what you get eventually. We're going to talk about one of those teams in the NFC who had a really good record, and you kind of knew it was bullshit, and now it's confirmed that it was. So, Cleveland with a big win, and Baker Mayfield, it's another situation with him. Less is more. He doesn't need to do much. Just hand the ball off, play simple football, and it's good enough for a guy like that. Because when he had to make plays, it wasn't working out. And he doesn't really have many receiving weapons. So if they can keep that offensive line intact, they're going to be in games. Which then leads to Houston. It's a rough year for them. They obviously there was high hopes after they had beaten the Bills last year in the first round, then lost a really tough game to Kansas City where they had a huge lead and blew it immediately. And look, when you trade DeAndre Hopkins, it's going to be tough. That's not going to help things. So Deshaun Watson's doing what he can. From what I'm seeing, I don't think that Deshaun Watson is the problem. I just think that overall they're, something just seems to be a bit off. The running game isn't good at all, with or without David Johnson. So their season's pretty much in the tubes. And not to mention, they traded away their first-round pick to Miami. So that's tough, too. Like, if you're a Houston fan, it's like, even losing games isn't going to do you any good. It's actually going to make you feel worse. So, not a great place to be if you're a Texan fan. And just even better for Miami, that situation. Jacksonville, it's going to be between them and the Jets for that first overall pick. That much is clear. And I think that they're playing competitively. They almost won in Green Bay. So, I don't know what else to say with them, but now they play Pittsburgh, who's obviously still undefeated. But it's funny. I could actually see that game similar to the Green Bay game being close. Jacksonville's been playing hard, but their schedule is so tough. And we just saw the Jets almost beat the Patriots that I do think that Jets-Jaguars thing could get interesting as the season winds down. And now that brings us to Colts versus the Titans. And these teams play twice in 3 weeks. They just had their game on Thursday night in Tennessee, and the Colts came up with a very big victory. It was close to a must-win for the Colts as far as the division was concerned. It was. And Indy just seems like a little bit more well-rounded, specifically on the defense. And Tennessee is a little bit of the type of team where they kind of need the lead as well to work Derrick Henry more into the mix. If they're losing, he kind of gets phased out and they have some trouble. Not as extreme as like a Baltimore. We've seen them, be in shootouts and win games. But at least it was apparent the other night that once they went down, that was it. Nothing was happening. So what happens in the game in Indy in a couple weeks, that will certainly determine the direction of this division for sure. I would go as far to say the winner of that game wins the division. So Indy, really on offense, there's, you have a diminished Phillip Rivers, diminished T.Y. Hilton, bit of a mix and match situation with the running backs and the tight ends, and a pretty good offensive line. And so they're not really a sexy team at all, but they're hanging in there. And now they have Green Bay at home. That'll be a big test. Tennessee's going to Baltimore. That'll be a big test as well. So it's clearly just those two teams. And for the loser, the wild card situation, like I said, is competitive. So there's no guarantee that the loser works their way in as well. So that will be a fun game to watch in a couple of weeks that I think will go a long way in the playoff picture. For the AFC West, the Chiefs were on bye. They have a big game with the Raiders on Sunday night. A very big game, in fact. The Raiders dominated the Broncos. Absolutely crushed them. So now you have a situation where the Raiders, if you remember, won the first game in Kansas City. So now, going into this game in Vegas, if the Raiders win, they have the tiebreaker and they'll be a game back. I think Kansas City's the better team, without a doubt. But if the Raiders win this game, then that is all of a sudden a race that I don't think any of us would have seen. Not a shot. So I kind of would be pulling for the Raiders to win, just so you have something going there. I'd assume that Kansas City would run away with it, but the Raiders' good play has kept things alive. I think Kansas City will win that game, especially the fact, to get that bad taste out of their mouth with that tough home loss to them a few weeks back. But Derek Carr's playing good football. They're running the ball well. And I feel like that's a constant theme. It's not fun in terms, it's not like necessarily aesthetically pleasing, but running the ball well, it sets up so much, it sets up everything in the offense. We see it with Cleveland. We see it with Vegas. We see it with the Giants. That's how you do win games. It sets up the pass. It sets up the play action. And so I think Vegas, it would be a huge statement win if they can beat Kansas City yet again. So I'd keep my eye on that. Going back to the NFC, let's start with the NFC West. We already talked about Arizona and their big win. The Seahawks versus the Rams. I don't know what to say about Seattle. They were undefeated, and I didn't believe it. Their defense didn't look great. And then it all started off with that tough loss to Arizona, which they should have easily won that game. Without a doubt. They totally blew that. And now they find themselves in a precarious situation after just having lost to the Rams. And that's another kind of Jekyll and Hyde team, the Rams. Sometimes I look at them and I say, like, this offense isn't so great. Sean McVay, he loves to pound the rock. They were using Cam Akers a little bit more this week, so it was a bit more of a three-headed attack. And Jared Goff is doing less, and it's kind of working out. Whereas a few years ago, it was a different story. They were airing the ball out a lot more. They've changed their approach. And their defense has been good enough. It's been better than I thought, actually, because besides Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, who are amazing, I wasn't really impressed by the rest of that defense. So I have to give them kudos because it was a big win against Seattle. And now you have a 3-team race in that division. San Francisco, you can forget about them. And it's unfortunate. It really is injury related. I would have liked to have seen what they would have done with a healthy roster. That team is just so decimated. I could see them winning a few games here, maybe being a spoiler within the division, but they are more or less done. So that leads you into Seattle, Arizona on Thursday night. That is going to be a fun game. Unfortunately, a lot of these Thursday night games, the quality isn't quite as good, but I think this one will be fun, especially coming off the games, the game they just had a few weeks ago. Wilson versus Murray Part 2. Obviously, Arizona's win kind of has them with the sky-high feeling. And can Seattle kind of just get this division back into their hands? Because if they lose it, again, I don't know. it's to handicap that game is tough. Seattle's very banged up. I don't know if Chris Carson will be back. You can never tell. Pete Carroll, when it comes to injuries, he's not exactly honest, or he just can't evaluate his injuries because he's way more optimistic. And then when the game comes around, those players are inactive a lot of times. So, and it sounds like Tyler Lockett might be banged up as well. So, we'll see. Very excited for that game. NFC South, Drew Brees gets injured, and now we'll see what Jameis Winston can do. I'm sure they're going to use Taysom Hill as well. New Orleans, they'll be able to tread water enough, but it is tough because Tampa, as you might expect, Tom Brady got embarrassed the week before, comes out, lights it up against Carolina. So I think that New Orleans, they play Atlanta this week. That could be tricky. Atlanta's playing a little bit better. Those divisional games, you never know. So they're going to want to win that. And there's a lot on the line as far as the fact that maybe you could get a bye, right? There's only one seed this year that gets a bye. And I'd say that both of those teams, especially New Orleans, is in play for that. But here's the team that really is, and that's Green Bay. Green Bay didn't win by much against Jacksonville. It wasn't pretty, but they're set up nicely. They really are in terms of their remaining schedule, and they're relatively healthy. Jair Alexander was out. It's concussion. Those are tricky. You never really know the timeline on those, but you like to think he'll be back soon. So I think Green Bay, the fact that they beat New Orleans as well for tiebreaker reasons, they're in a nice spot. And Minnesota versus Chicago, which just ended, I'm not surprised at all by that result. Chicago, you knew that their record just was not sustainable whatsoever. Not a chance that they were going to be able to hold that record. And now Nick Foles might be hurt. Trubisky's been hurt himself. They have a bye now, so I'd have to think that Trubisky would be the quarterback, which I think is good for them anyway. See what he's got the rest of the season before you move forward. Nick Foles clearly isn't the quarterback of the future for Chicago, and probably neither is Trubisky, but I think this is a blessing in disguise just to see what he has. Foles cannot move around. The guy is a statue, and they have no running game. It's pretty ugly to watch. It is. And as a Giant fan, it makes you think back to the Week 2 game. It's too bad that we didn't play them now, because I think we would have won. And we almost won that game then, so that's kind of unfortunate that that's in the loss column. So Minnesota, they're on the way up. Started 1-5, like I said. They're 4-5 now, and they have 3 straight games against Dallas, Carolina, potentially without Teddy Bridgewater, and Jacksonville, all at home. They could be looking from 1-5 to 7-5 very quickly. So we might have written Minnesota off a little bit too soon, because I could see them making things, I guess, questionable for some of those maybe NFC West teams. I think that they're superior overall, but Minnesota, this is a playoff team last year. They won their first, and they won against New Orleans as well. So, in that first round. So, I would not count the Vikings out just yet. So, we'll be looking forward to Week 11. Giants are off. So, like I said, I'll certainly have my eyes on Eagles-Browns, especially Cowboys-Vikings, and Washington versus the Bengals. And then you'll have the Thanksgiving games, and then the Giants-Bengals after that. So it'll just be fun to, for now, watch these games and have the hope, as unlikely as I still think it is, that maybe they can find themselves, not just in the playoffs, but hosting a home game with no fans. I totally get that. But that's still something to be excited for, and it's still great for the growth of this team. And this is one of the few weeks I'm on here where there is genuine joy coming from me, cautiously, but every reason to be excited about what's to come. I'll talk to you guys next week.